Thank you, Carlos, for that very kind introduction. You're a very generous host. And thank you to the Friends of Socialist China for the invitation to participate. It's a really great privilege to be here with great comrades. So last night, in a little tiny bout of masochism, I decided to take a peek at what was going on at Biden's other event on democracy. And I think, Carlos, it wasn't just a flop, as you said, it was a total embarrassment. You know, Mexico's president, López Obrador, had used the opportunity to describe the US democratic system as, correctly, I think, as an oligarchy that reigns with the facade of democracy. Brazil's president Lula refused to sign a declaration of the summit because of the divisive language it contained. A huge embarrassment. And it seemed to me like it was mostly the reactionaries, the authoritarian reactionaries that played along. I wanted to see what the president of my country, of Poland, Andrzej Duda, had to say. It wasn't very much. He gave a speech that was just slightly over 300 words long, but I think it captured the spirit of that summit. The first 44 words of his speech were dedicated first to attacking our neighboring country, Belarus, and second to attacking the refugees that, with great desperation, at great risk to themselves, these are people who have died, many people have died on that journey, who decided to cross into Poland through the Belarusian border. Now, we know these aren't just words because Poland recently built a wall to stop these refugees from coming in. And one of the great ironies, I think, of the post-socialist period in Poland is that the company that built that wall, very same company, used to, under socialist management, send builders and architects and urban planners to post-colonial societies to help them develop, including to places like Iraq. And now it built a wall to stop Iraqi, Afghani, and Syrian refugees from coming into Poland after rejoining the US and destroying their countries. It's a travesty. And appropriately, the next 190 or so words were dedicated to war. Duda said that we need more weapons, we need more sanctions, and he said, we need Russia's final and ultimate defeat, which is a position that would have seemed absolutely insane coming from a NATO member state just 6 months ago, but has somehow quietly slipped into the mainstream without much fanfare in the West. Andrzej Duda, he represents a theocratic, reactionary, right-wing ruling party. And it's interesting to note what he didn't talk about in his speech. He didn't talk about the women who are dying in Poland because our government banned abortion. He didn't talk about the members of the LGBT community that face harassment and very high levels of violence across the country, especially after regional administrations decided to label their territories as LGBT-free zones. And he didn't talk about the people who burned trash to keep themselves warm through the last winter, where we had the very first year of what's likely to be a prolonged energy crisis. What celebration of democracy begins with the language of exclusion and the language of war? And what democracy ignores the most urgent needs of its people? Well, let's call it what it is, as Luna did. It's bourgeois democracy, the democracy of profit, the democracy of exclusion, which is always the democracy of conquest and the democracy of war. And it's a democracy that, to a large extent, has been defined for us by a nation built on the genocide of the Native American people and the enslavement of human beings from Africa. It's a democracy that has been defined for us by a nation that has almost never known peace and whose violence has been used to topple democratic political projects on every inhabited continent. And it's not just nations that are excluded from this democracy and its summits and its congresses. It's not just the nations who are told that they have to abide by the illegal wars and interventions and sanctions and economic coercion and so on. It's the people who are excluded. It's the people who are at war, including in the very nations that pretend to carry the torch of democracy. How can we call democratic countries where trade unions and popular movements are considered antagonists of the state? It's a crazy idea. Every democratic gain we have made in the West, in my country in the post-socialist period, from the woman's right to vote to the weekend to the 8-hour workday and so on and so forth, has faced violent resistance from the ruling classes. Every one of these wins had to be wrangled from our so-called democracies with force, and now these gains are being rolled back. France is on fire because, as someone mentioned, its leader decided to pass a pensions reform in defiance even of a meek parliament that has delivered little more than neoliberal theft over the past few decades. Germany faces deindustrialization because the US, and huge levels of inflation actually, because the US decided to blow up the second Russian-German pipeline. And if you don't know about the first, I would recommend that you read the memoirs of a certain Antony Blinken, the current US Secretary of State, who describes how Reagan destroyed the Druzhba, or friendship pipeline, in the 1980s, which was a major blow to European energy sovereignty then, just as the destruction of Nord Stream is today. And of course, not to mention the situation in the United States, which Margaret, Luna, and others have already talked about. It's not enough. It's not enough for us to say that we have little influence over policies in bourgeois democracy. We are not allowed to have influence. The desires and aspirations of the people are shut down with batons and tear gas, and sometimes bullets. They are disarmed with assaults on trade unions. They're disarmed with assaults on public education. They're disarmed by misery and loneliness and addiction. And that's democracy under capitalism. It's not democracy at all. It's a farce. It's an antiquated system run by inadequate people, exclusively for the benefit of a tiny, tiny fraction of our societies. But there's an antidote. The antidote is socialism. We can fight the assaults on our communities by building organizations and institutions that bring us together. We can fight the assault on our intellects by embedding political education in our struggles, by reading Luna's book, and by learning from the very real successes of socialism all around the world, which exist, even though we're not allowed to say that they exist. Popular democracy is being built. Look at Cuba. Nearly half the Cuban population took part in a democratic consultative process that delivered the most progressive family law in human history. And look at China. China mobilized nearly 1 million members of the party to walk alongside the very poorest members of Chinese society and work with them to build pathways to prosperity. And 800 million people were lifted out of poverty. Again, a feat that's unprecedented in human history. And of course, we had the great privilege of hearing from Carlos about that other great socialist process in Venezuela. And I promise you, however much we plead and however much we beg, Ursula von der Leyen will not deliver such progress to our society. Joe Biden will not deliver such progress to our society. And Emmanuel Macron will not deliver such progress. But we can. We can build socialism. We must build socialism. We must recover the democratic spirit that's been taken away from us, that calls on us to be active agents in our societies, to work every day towards building the kind of democracy that we want to have, and to challenge the nihilism that's so pervasive in the West that says that no alternative is possible, that it's bad everywhere. And I think that's the minimum commitment that I hope we can all make at this summit today. Thank you.